I never thought I'd evict my own mother from her house, but I also never thought she'd cut me out of her will after I spent my entire life trying to help her. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I'm 34 years old, and I'm sitting in my childhood home that now legally belongs to me, not because my mother Patricia wanted me to have it, but because I purchased it myself after years of being taken advantage of. The walls of this house hold so many memories, both painful and precious. It's strange how a place can simultaneously feel like home and like the site of your greatest betrayals. My relationship with my mother has always been strained, tense, like a wire pulled too tight and ready to snap at any moment. For as long as I can remember, my younger brother Daniel was always the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. He was the one who received all the praise, all the second chances, all the financial support, while I was expected to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who would sacrifice whatever was needed for the family. Mom always had money problems, even when we were kids. After my father died, it only got worse. The constant calls asking for loans that were never repaid, the endless demands disguised as familial obligation. I endured it all, hoping that someday she would see me, really see me, and everything I had contributed. Instead, when I discovered she had secretly revised her will to leave everything to my brother, right after I had paid off $40,000 of her debt, something inside me finally broke. The look on her face when I revealed that I was her new landlord still haunts me sometimes. The shock, the betrayal, the rage, all the emotions I had felt for years reflected back at me. Was I wrong to buy her house out from under her? Maybe. But after a lifetime of being the family scapegoat while watching my brother drain her finances dry with zero consequences, I finally decided it was time to choose myself. My father's death changed everything. I was 11 when he collapsed from a sudden heart attack while mowing the lawn on a sweltering July afternoon. Daniel was only 8. Dad had been the emotional center of our family, patient, kind, and genuinely interested in both of us equally. After we lost him, Mom's grief transformed into a potent mixture of financial anxiety and bitter resentment that seemed to grow with each passing year. That's when the pattern of favoritism became impossible to ignore. While Daniel got new clothes for school, I received hand-me-downs from cousins. When I needed a graphing calculator for advanced math, Mom said we couldn't afford it. But somehow, there was always money for Daniel's latest video game console or sports equipment. Despite the lack of support, I threw myself into academics, maintaining a perfect GPA and joining every academic club that might look good on college applications. Mom barely noticed. When Daniel struggled in school, blaming teachers or boring subjects for his poor grades, Mom hired expensive tutors and scheduled meetings with the principal to advocate for him. I still remember the first real betrayal that made my stomach drop like an elevator with snapped cables. I was 16 and had been saving for college since I was 13. Babysitting, mowing lawns, tutoring younger kids. One evening, Mom sat me down and explained that she'd borrowed my college fund, nearly $3,000 I'd saved, to send Daniel to an exclusive summer sports camp. Daniel needs more support to succeed, Olivia. You've always been the smart one who can take care of yourself. He needs this opportunity, she explained, as if taking my money was actually a compliment to my independence. I was devastated, but didn't show it. Instead, I picked up even more shifts at the local grocery store and started waitressing on weekends, determined to rebuild my savings. By the time I graduated as valedictorian 2 years later, I had managed to save nearly $8,000 through sheer determination. The graduation party Mom threw was supposedly for both of us. Daniel had barely passed his sophomore year. But somehow his marginal accomplishment of improving his attendance record received more attention than my scholarship offers and academic awards. As I stood awkwardly in the corner of our living room watching Mom beam with pride as she told relatives about Daniel's remarkable progress, I made a silent promise to myself. If I just worked hard enough, maybe she would finally notice me. My scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania to study business finance was my ticket out. For 4 years, I immersed myself in a world where effort was rewarded and accomplishments acknowledged. I graduated with honors, secured an entry-level position at a respected investment firm in Philadelphia, and started building a life that was entirely my own. Meanwhile, Daniel had enrolled in and dropped out of the local community college 3 separate times, with Mom making excuses about him finding his path and being too creative for traditional education. By 27, I had my own apartment, a reliable car, a healthy savings account, and was on track for a promotion. Daniel, at 24, was still living at home, cycling through a series of jobs he couldn't keep for more than a few months, and accumulating debt that mysteriously always became Mom's problem. The calls for financial help started small, a few $100s for an overdue electric bill, $1,000 for car repairs, but quickly escalated to larger family emergencies that somehow always coincided with Daniel's latest crisis. I tried to establish boundaries, suggesting budgeting tools or offering to help Mom create a financial plan, but my advice was always dismissed with variations of, "You don't understand our situation," or "Family helps family without judgment." My 30th birthday should have been a celebration. I'd been promoted to senior financial advisor and wanted to treat myself to a nice dinner with Mom and a few close friends at an upscale restaurant in the city. I'd made reservations weeks in advance, but 3 hours before we were supposed to meet, Mom called in tears. Daniel had been arrested for his second DUI and she needed $2,000 immediately for bail. When I suggested we handle it after my birthday dinner, her response cut deep. "You're the successful one, Olivia. You don't need a celebration. Your brother needs us right now." I canceled the reservations, transferred the money, and spent my milestone birthday alone with takeout and a bottle of wine. 6 months later, when Mom called about overdue property taxes threatening her home, I used my entire annual bonus to pay the $12,000 bill. It was around this time that I met Ryan through a mutual friend. Smart, kind, and perceptive, he quickly became important to me. He was also the first person to openly question the dynamic with my family. "It sounds like you're their emergency fund, not their daughter," he observed after witnessing one of Mom's urgent money requests. I defended her reflexively, explaining about Dad's death and her struggles as a single mother, but Ryan's words planted a seed of awareness that I couldn't quite shake. The contrast between how Mom spoke about Daniel's potential versus my actual achievements became increasingly glaring. Daniel's failed attempt at starting a dog-walking business was entrepreneurial spirit, while my promotion was dismissed with, "Well, you've always been good with numbers." Mom would call me with detailed updates about Daniel's latest pursuits, but rarely asked about my life. The imbalance was painful, but I had spent so long justifying it that acknowledging the truth felt like betraying my family. Or worse, admitting that perhaps I wasn't worthy of equal love after all. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was working late, preparing a presentation for a major client, when Mom's name flashed on my phone screen. Her voice was thick with tears as she explained that the bank had sent a final notice. The house was going into foreclosure in 30 days unless she could make a substantial payment. I drove the 2 hours to her house that weekend, determined to understand exactly what was happening with her finances. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Mom had accumulated nearly $65,000 in debt, maxed out credit cards, a second mortgage she'd taken out without telling me, and personal loans with predatory interest rates. As I sorted through the stack of bills and notices spread across her kitchen table, the truth emerged. Daniel had been using Mom's credit cards for his so-called business ventures, including a failed attempt at cryptocurrency trading and an ill-conceived food truck idea that never made it past the planning stage. When I confronted Mom about allowing Daniel to access her finances, her defense was immediate and predictable. "He was just trying to make something of himself, Olivia. He has such big dreams, and sometimes you have to take risks to succeed." The familiar sting of the double standard burned in my chest, but I pushed it aside to focus on the immediate crisis. I spent the entire weekend investigating her financial situation, creating spreadsheets detailing every debt, interest rate, and minimum payment. When I presented my findings and suggested a structured repayment plan where I would help with part or of the debt if she would commit to financial counseling, Mom's response was cold. "You're being controlling and judgmental," she snapped. "If you really wanted to help, you wouldn't attach all these conditions. That's not how family treats family." This marked the third significant hurt in our relationship, being accused of having ulterior motives when I was genuinely trying to help. Daniel, who had been conspicuously absent during my financial investigation, appeared just as I was preparing to leave Sunday evening. He hung back in the doorway, watching with barely concealed hostility as I explained the severity of the situation. "Must be nice to show up and tell everyone what to do from your fancy city apartment," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Always showing off how much money you have while Mom struggles." His comment ignored the fact that I had been sending money home regularly for years. Money that had apparently been funding his failed enterprises rather than providing actual stability. After several tense phone calls and sleepless nights, I reluctantly agreed to pay $40,000 toward Mom's most urgent debts, enough to stop the foreclosure and clear the highest interest credit cards. It was nearly all of my savings, money I had been setting aside for a down payment on my own home. I created a detailed payment plan and budgeting system for Mom, setting up automatic payments for essential bills and establishing a reasonable allowance for daily expenses. Mom accepted my help with obvious resentment, treating my financial guidance as an insult rather than the lifeline it was. As I drove back to Philadelphia after finalizing the arrangements, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in me. The weight of being the family fixer was becoming unbearable, and Ryan's gentle questions about the sustainability of this pattern echoed in my mind. I was 31 years old and had just emptied my savings account to rescue my mother from financial ruin, caused largely by my brother's irresponsibility. And somehow, I was still cast as the villain for not doing it with blind, unquestioning enthusiasm. 3 months after paying off Mom's debts, I took a week off work to help her organize the home office, which had become a chaotic repository for unopened mail and haphazard paperwork. I was determined to establish a system that would prevent another financial disaster. While sorting through a file cabinet, I discovered a folder containing recent legal documents, and my world tilted on its axis. Inside was a revised will, dated just 2 weeks after I had transferred the $40,000 to save the house. The contents were unmistakably clear. Mom was leaving everything to Daniel. The house I had just saved from foreclosure, a $250,000 life insurance policy, and all family heirlooms, including my grandmother's vintage jewelry collection that had always been promised to me. All of it explicitly bequeathed to my brother, with no mention of me at all. My hands trembled as I held the document, my mind struggling to process this fresh betrayal. When Mom returned from grocery shopping, I was still sitting on the office floor, the will open in my lap. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She took the papers from my hands and returned them to the folder with methodical precision. "You're financially stable, Olivia," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Daniel will need the inheritance. He doesn't have your advantages." The timing was impossible to ignore. She had updated her will immediately after I had sacrificed my financial security to save her home. "Advantages?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean the advantages I created for myself while you were funneling every resource to Daniel? The advantages I earned working multiple jobs since high school? Those advantages?" Mom's expression hardened. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You've always been jealous of your brother's relationship with me. You've always kept score." Before I could respond, Daniel walked in, immediately sensing the tension. When I explained what I had discovered, his response was a smug shrug. "Don't be greedy, Olivia. You already have enough." The word greedy ignited something in me. Decades of unrecognized sacrifices, of showing up whenever they called, of giving and giving while receiving nothing in return. Greedy? I stood up, no longer able to contain my hurt and anger. I just gave Mom $40,000 to save this house, a house that apparently will never be mine even in part. How exactly does that make me greedy? Mom stepped between us, her face flushed with anger. "This is exactly why I made the decision I did. You're ungrateful, Olivia. You throw your help in our faces whenever you don't get your way. If you really wanted to help, you wouldn't expect anything in return." The conversation devolved into accusations and tears, ending with Mom's ultimatum. "If you can't accept my decisions about my own property, then maybe you should leave." I did leave, driving aimlessly through my old neighborhood with tears blurring my vision, eventually pulling into a park where I'd played as a child. Sitting on a bench near the swings, I called Ryan, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. For the first time, I allowed myself to seriously question the narrative I'd been living within. Have I really been a terrible daughter all this time? Is it wrong to expect even basic recognition or appreciation? Ryan's response was gentle, but firm. "Olivia, helping family is natural, but relationships should have some reciprocity. What you're describing sounds like a pattern of exploitation, not family love." As dusk settled over the park, Ryan's words settled into my consciousness, beginning to shift something fundamental in how I viewed my family dynamic. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given, making myself smaller to accommodate Daniel's needs, and accepting blame for having reasonable expectations of fairness. Perhaps the most painful realization was that no sacrifice would ever be enough. The goalposts would always move, and I would always be cast as selfish for having any needs or boundaries at all. Easter had always been a big deal in our family, with relatives gathering at Mom's house for an elaborate meal and egg hunt for the younger cousins. Despite the tension following the will discovery, I arrived early that Sunday with a honey-glazed ham, homemade scalloped potatoes, and thoughtfully chosen gifts for everyone. Still desperately clinging to the hope that showing enough love might somehow fix what was broken. Mom was unusually attentive to my aunts and uncles, laughing too loudly at their jokes and repeatedly mentioning how blessed she was to have such a loyal family. I busied myself in the kitchen, arranging deviled eggs on the platter shaped, like a chicken that we'd used since I was a child. Daniel arrived an hour late, making a grand entrance with shopping bags from high-end stores. He distributed expensive gifts, a designer scarf for Mom, premium whiskey for our uncles, luxury chocolates for our aunts, items that seemed far beyond what he could afford on his sporadic income. Mom beamed at him with undisguised adoration, exclaiming over each gift as though he'd personally crafted it rather than simply swiping a credit card. Throughout the elaborate meal, I maintained a pleasant facade, asking cousins about their children and complimenting aunts on their new hairstyles. Just as I was beginning to relax, thinking we might get through the day without incident, Mom tapped her glass with a spoon. "Before dessert, I want to take care of some family business," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining room. "As you all know, I've been thinking about the future more seriously these days." My stomach clenched as she continued, pulling folded papers from her pocket. "I've updated my will recently, and I wanted everyone to understand my decisions now, so there's no confusion later." What followed was the most public humiliation of my life. Mom proceeded to explain, in excruciating detail, why she had decided to leave everything to Daniel. "Olivia has always been blessed with academic skills and financial success," she said, as though my hard work was some accident of birth requiring no effort. "But she's demonstrated that her help comes with strings attached. When I needed assistance, with some bills, She created complicated budgets and payment plans instead of just helping family the way family should. Gasps and uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the room as Mom continued. Daniel, on the other hand, has shown unconditional love and support. He's been by my side through everything, never judging, never making me feel like a burden. Throughout this speech, Daniel maintained a perfect mask of humble gratitude, occasionally glancing at me with what could only be described as triumph in his eyes. When Mom finished, he stood and hugged her, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "I've always been Mom's favorite, Olivia. You should have accepted that a long time ago." The room pulsed with uncomfortable tension as relatives avoided eye contact with me, some looking genuinely shocked, others seeming unsurprised by the revelation. When I finally found my voice, my attempt to defend myself was immediately shut down. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Mom interrupted. "Always making everything about you, Olivia. This is my decision to make." Aunt Carol tried to change the subject to her recent cruise, but the damage was done. I sat through dessert in a fog of humiliation, mechanically answering questions directed my way, until I couldn't bear another minute of pretending. I excused myself, claiming a migraine, and fled to my car. Once inside, the tears came in violent waves that left me gasping for breath, unable to even start the engine. I fumbled for my phone, calling Ryan with shaking hands. "I can't drive," I managed between sobs. "Can you come get me?" 45 minutes later, Ryan pulled up behind my car. He helped me into the passenger seat of his vehicle, promising to arrange for my car to be picked up later. As we drove away from my childhood home, I could see Mom and Daniel watching from the front window, their expressions unreadable in the fading light. It was during that silent drive back to my apartment that I finally began to see with perfect clarity what had been happening all along. This wasn't about inheritance or money, or even family loyalty. This was about a lifetime of being cast as the scapegoat in a narrative that required someone to play that role. No matter what I did or didn't do, I would always be the villain in my mother's story. The weeks following Easter were a blur of numbness punctuated by moments of clarity so sharp they felt like physical pain. At Ryan's gentle insistence, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Karen Bennett, who specialized in family dynamics. "What you're describing contains elements of narcissistic family patterns," she explained during our third session. "In these systems, there's often a golden child and a scapegoat, roles that become rigid over time regardless of actual behavior." Our weekly sessions became anchored points in the fog of my confusion, gradually helping me recognize patterns I'd normalized my entire life. I learned about emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, and how dysfunctional families often resist any change that threatens the established dynamics. Memorial Day passed with minimal family contact, just a brief text exchange with Mom about the neighborhood parade we used to attend together. I was beginning to establish a fragile sense of peace with my decision to create distance when my cousin Amanda called in early June with news that reopened the wound. "I thought you should know," she said hesitantly. "Aunt Patty is facing foreclosure again. There's gossip circulating at the family barbecue yesterday." I thanked Amanda for the information and sat motionless after hanging up, staring at the wall of my apartment as emotions warred within me. Concern, anger, exhaustion, and beneath it all, a sense of bitter predictability. After careful consideration, I called a real estate contact who confirmed the property was indeed in pre-foreclosure proceedings. Through discreet inquiries, I discovered the truth. Daniel had somehow convinced Mom to take out a $50,000 home equity line of credit, supposedly for a guaranteed investment opportunity, that had predictably failed. When I called Mom to express concern about the situation, her defense of Daniel was immediate and absolute. It wasn't his fault the investment didn't work out. He was trying to help secure our future. At least he tries to find solutions instead of just judging everyone. This conversation, so familiar in its patterns yet still painful in its impact, became the catalyst for what happened next. Over the following week, I researched property records, loan status, and foreclosure procedures. In Pennsylvania, I consulted with my financial advisor about liquidating certain investments and spoke with an attorney about creating a limited liability company. Throughout this process, Ryan remained my sounding board, never telling me what to do, but asking questions that helped clarify my thinking. "Is this about revenge or self-protection?" he asked one evening as we sat on my balcony. "Would you regret either doing this or not doing it 5 years from now?" I wrestled with these questions during sleepless nights, examining my motivations from every angle. Was I becoming as manipulative as them by contemplating this plan? Or was I finally establishing consequences after years of exploitation? The decision crystallized after yet another call from Mom, this one requesting $10,000 for essential home repairs, with no acknowledgement of the prior foreclosure discussion. When I gently asked for more details about the repairs, suggesting I might help her get multiple contractor quotes, her response was coldly familiar. "If you don't want to help, just say so. Don't make me jump through hoops to prove I deserve your assistance." Something settled in me then, a calm certainty that what I was considering wasn't spite, but self-preservation. I moved forward with creating an LLC registered to my business, address in Philadelphia, with a name, Heritage Property Solutions, that gave no indication of my involvement. I arranged with my financial advisor to liquidate enough investments to make a cash offer on the property when it went to auction, accepting the penalties for early withdrawal as the cost of finally freeing myself from this cycle. Each step was taken methodically, with legal consultation to ensure I was operating within the bounds of the law. My therapist called it enforcing boundaries with consequences, rather than revenge, a framing that helped me reconcile my actions with my values. As the foreclosure date approached, I prepared emotionally for what would come next, knowing that purchasing the house would forever alter my relationship with my mother and brother. Yet, with each preparation, I felt increasing certainty that I was finally choosing myself after a lifetime of being everyone else's safety net without reciprocal support. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for the third Tuesday in July. I took the day off work, telling colleagues I had a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. Dressed in a conservative pantsuit that projected professional confidence, I arrived at the county courthouse 30 minutes early, my attorney discreetly meeting me at a coffee shop across the street to review our strategy one final time. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped my Americano, the culmination of weeks of preparation suddenly very real. "Remember, this is a business transaction," he reminded me. "Keep emotions out of the bidding process." The auction itself was anticlimactic. Only 3 bidders showed interest in the modest 3-bedroom colonial in a middle-class neighborhood with declining property values. When my attorney placed the winning bid of $210,000 on behalf of Heritage Property Solutions LLC, it was accepted, with a dispassionate bang of the gavel. I signed the necessary paperwork with a signature that didn't advertise my connection to the property, and within an hour, I legally owned my childhood home. I was still processing this reality when my phone rang in the courthouse parking lot. Mom's familiar ringtone sending a jolt of adrenaline through my system. "The house sold," she said without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Some company bought it at auction. The bank says we have 30 days before eviction proceedings start." I gripped the steering wheel of my parked car, taking a measured breath before responding with practiced calm. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. Do you and Daniel have a plan for where you'll go?" The conversation that followed was painfully predictable. Implicit expectations that I would somehow fix this latest crisis, vague references to the impossibility of finding affordable housing, and eventually, the direct question, "Can you help us with first and last month's rent on an apartment?" Just until we get back on our feet, I was non-committal, saying I needed to review my finances, buying time to implement the next phase of my plan. Over the next week, I worked with my attorney to prepare for the revelation of my ownership. We drafted a standard rental agreement, offering Mom and Daniel a 6-month lease at a nominal rent of $800, well below market value, but enough to establish a formal landlord-tenant relationship. We scheduled a meeting at the house for the following Saturday, with my attorney present to handle any potential legal issues. When I pulled into the driveway that morning, the familiar sight of my childhood home hit me with unexpected emotional force. This was the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd studied late into the night for AP exams, where I'd said a final goodbye to my father. Now I was returning as the owner, about to deliver news that would forever change my family dynamic. Mom opened the door with obvious confusion at the sight of me and an unknown man in a suit. "Olivia, what are you doing here? And who is this?" I introduced my attorney as a business associate and asked to come inside. Daniel emerged from the kitchen, a bowl of cereal in hand, despite it being almost noon. The four of us sat awkwardly in the living room, the tension palpable even before a word was spoken about the purpose of our visit. "I have something important to tell you both," I began, my rehearsed speech suddenly inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. "The company that purchased this house at auction, Heritage Property Solutions, is mine. I created it specifically to buy this property. I am your new landlord." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower from down the street. Mom's face transformed from confusion to shock to rage in the span of seconds. Daniel's cereal bowl clattered onto the coffee table, milk sloshing over the edge. "This is a joke, right?" Mom finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. My attorney stepped in, presenting the property deed and other documentation confirming my ownership. "Ms. Reynolds is now the legal owner of this property. She is willing to offer you a 6-month lease agreement at a significantly reduced rate to allow you time to make alternative arrangements." What followed was exactly what I had prepared for but was still difficult to endure. Mom's accusations of betrayal, Daniel's threatening posture as he paced the room, dramatic declarations about blood and loyalty. When Daniel stepped toward me, his face contorted with anger, my attorney firmly intervened, reminding him that intimidation could result in immediate eviction proceedings rather than the generous terms I was offering. "This is strictly business," I said, echoing the exact words Mom had used when explaining why I hadn't been included in her will. "The lease agreement offers you 6 months at $800 per month, which is approximately half the market rate for this area. You're welcome to stay under these terms while you find other arrangements, or you can choose to leave sooner." Mom oscillated between rage and manipulation, her tactics shifting rapidly when one approach didn't work. "After everything I've done for you," she cried, triggering a lifetime of conditioned guilt that I had to actively resist. Daniel attempted intimidation, then switched to a performance of remorse so transparent it would have been comical in any other context. "I know we've had our differences, sis, but this is our home. You can't just take it away." I remained resolute, explaining that the lease was a courtesy, not an obligation, and that their options were to sign or to begin looking for new housing immediately. In the end, they signed the agreement, their signatures sharp with resentment, on the crisp legal documents. As I stood to leave, new house keys in my possession for the first time, Mom's parting words followed me to the door. "I always knew you were cold, Olivia, but I never thought you'd stoop this low." I turned back one last time, meeting her gaze directly. "I learned from the best, Mom. This is exactly what you've been teaching me my entire life. That family is conditional, that loyalty only flows in one direction, and that everything has a price." The door closed between us with a finality that echoed in my chest as I walked to my car, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in years. The next 3 months were a study in escalating hostility disguised as compliance. Mom and Daniel paid the August rent on time, creating a momentary illusion that they might actually adhere to the agreement. By September, the payment arrived, 5 days late with no explanation. October's rent never materialized at all, forcing me to initiate uncomfortable conversations about their intentions. We've been looking for a place, but everything is too expensive, Mom explained during one tense phone call. You know we're doing our best. Regular drive-by observations of the property revealed no signs of packing or preparation for moving. Meanwhile, my property manager, hired specifically to create a buffer between me and my family, reported concerning developments. Complaints from neighbors about late-night disturbances, visible damage to the front porch railing, and suspicions that additional people might be living in the house beyond the two named in the lease. When I finally inspected the property in late October, I discovered holes punched in several walls, stained carpeting, and a broken kitchen window shoddily covered with cardboard and duct tape. The damage was clearly intentional, a passive-aggressive retaliation that crossed the line from emotional manipulation to actual property destruction. After consulting with my attorney, I made the difficult decision to formally end the lease and initiate eviction proceedings. The official notice giving them 30 days to vacate the premises was delivered by certified mail on November 1st, with a copy posted on the front door to ensure compliance with legal requirements. Daniel's response was immediate and aggressive. He called at midnight, his words slurred and threatening. "You think you can just throw us out on the street? You have another thing coming, sister. We know things about you that could ruin your precious career." I ended the call after calmly stating that any threats would be documented and shared with authorities if necessary. What I hadn't anticipated was the extended family campaign that Mom initiated. For the next 2 weeks, I received calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins. Some genuinely concerned, others clearly manipulated by Mom's selective version of events. "How could you make your own mother homeless during the holidays?" Aunt Susan demanded. Uncle Dave suggested I was having some kind of psychological breakdown that required intervention. Only Amanda, the cousin who had initially informed me about the foreclosure, reached out with a different perspective. "I don't know exactly what's happened between you all," she said carefully, "but I've seen how they treat you at family gatherings. Whatever you're doing, I trust you have good reasons." Her support was an unexpected lifeline during increasingly isolating days. As the eviction date approached with no signs of compliance, I arranged for a formal eviction with Sheriff's Department presence, a precaution my attorney insisted upon given Daniel's previous threatening behavior. The day before the scheduled eviction, I received a text from Mom requesting a final conversation. Against my better judgment, but hoping for some peaceful resolution, I agreed to meet her at the house that evening. Walking into my childhood home felt surreal. Boxes were haphazardly stacked in the living room, the first concrete evidence that they were actually preparing to leave. Mom sat at the kitchen table, looking older than I remembered, the lines around her mouth deeper, her eyes tired. Daniel was notably absent. "I thought we should talk, just us," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. For nearly an hour, we engaged in a conversation that cycled through familiar patterns: her subtle blame, my defensive explanations, mutual accusations of betrayal. Then something shifted as Mom's composure cracked. "I only wanted what was best for our family," she said, her voice catching. The words triggered something in me, decades of suppressed responses rising to the surface. "No, Mom. You wanted what was best for Daniel and for yourself. I was never really considered family unless you needed something from me." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, my voice steady as I detailed years of unequal treatment, of showing up only to be dismissed, of financial support taken for granted while emotional support was withheld. "Do you know that you've never once told me you're proud of me? Not when I graduated valedictorian, not when I got my scholarship, not when I earned my promotions, not once. But Daniel gets praised for simply holding a job for more than a month." Mom listened with an expression I'd never seen before, something between revelation and grief. "I didn't realize," she said quietly. "I always thought you were so self-sufficient that you didn't need the encouragement Daniel did." Everyone needs encouragement, Mom. Everyone needs to know they matter. Our conversation was interrupted by Daniel's return, immediately hostile upon seeing me. Unlike Mom's moment of potential insight, Daniel doubled down, blaming me for destroying the family and always thinking I'm better than everyone. As his accusations escalated, Mom surprised me by gently interrupting. Daniel, that's enough. This situation is largely of our making. His betrayed expression at her failure to back him up completely might have been satisfying under different circumstances. The meeting ended without resolution, but with a new understanding, at least between Mom and me. The following day, I returned. With the sheriff's deputies for the formal eviction, stomach knotted with anxiety despite my certainty about the necessity of this action, Mom was subdued, informing me that she would be staying temporarily with her sister in Lancaster. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, having apparently left during the night without a forwarding address. As Mom placed her house keys on the counter, keys I had just replaced with my own set months earlier, the finality of the moment struck me with unexpected force. I am sorry it came to this, I said, meaning it despite everything. Mom nodded, her expression unreadable as she carried her last suitcase to my aunt's waiting car. Within an hour, they were gone, and I stood alone in the empty shell of my childhood. Home. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of settling floorboards. Sounds I remembered from late nights studying, from grieving my father, from all the moments that had shaped me within these walls. I moved through the room slowly, cataloging damage that would need repair, but also rediscovering spaces that held happier memories. The bay window where I'd read books during summer thunderstorms, the closet door frame marked with penciled height measurements from years when my father was still alive and our family intact. The renovation began in December, a symbolic cleansing that paralleled my ongoing emotional work. I hired contractors to repair the damage and update the tired interior, replacing the stained carpets with hardwood floors, tearing out the dated kitchen cabinets, and painting over the burgundy dining room that Mom had always loved, but I had secretly found oppressive. Each decision about the house became an exercise in reclaiming space, both physical and psychological. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Bennett continued, helping me process the complex emotions that surfaced as I transformed my childhood home. Guilt and grief can coexist with healthy boundaries, she reminded me during a particularly difficult session after I discovered a box of my childhood drawings in the attic, my father's careful dates and proud comments in the margins of each. 1. Honoring your father's memory doesn't require maintaining unhealthy relationships with other family members. The holidays arrived with invitations from extended family that I politely declined, choosing instead to celebrate with Ryan and a small circle of close friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. On Christmas Eve, as we sat around the fireplace in my newly renovated living room, Ryan surprised me by dropping to one knee, presenting a vintage emerald ring that captured the light like a promise. "You've shown me what real strength looks like this year," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I'd be honored to build a future with you." My yes felt like another step in choosing a life defined by mutual respect rather than obligation disguised as love. January brought news through the family grapevine that Daniel had found a job in Colorado, apparently deciding that geographical distance was preferable to confronting the consequences of his actions. Mom remained with Aunt Susan, sending me a brief but civil Christmas card with her new contact information. In February, a more substantial letter arrived, its careful handwriting familiar but the tone markedly different from our previous communications. "I've been doing some thinking," she wrote, "about the patterns in our family. I can't say I agree with everything you did, but I'm beginning to understand why you felt it was necessary." She acknowledged, perhaps for the first time, some of the inequities in how she had treated us, stopping short of a full apology but offering more self-awareness than I had ever witnessed from her. I read the letter several times before drafting a measured response, accepting this small olive branch, without abandoning the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. By spring, I had made decisions about the house, choosing to keep it as a rental property managed by a professional company rather than selling it outright. The practical financial advantages aligned with a sense that I wasn't quite ready to sever this final connection to my past, despite everything that had happened. Ryan and I began looking for our own home closer to Philadelphia, planning a small fall wedding that would include only those who genuinely celebrated our relationship. The journey from people-pleasing daughter to self-respecting adult had been painful but necessary, teaching me that true family is built on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than exploitation disguised as loyalty. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or exposing yourself to repeated harm. Most importantly, I discovered that choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is self-erasure. The last time I visited the house before the first tenants moved in, I stood in the empty living room where so many family dramas had unfolded. The space looked different now, brighter, more open, freed from the weight of decades of difficult history. I had come to understand that while I couldn't change my past, I could determine what role it would play in my future. The cycles of manipulation and unequal treatment that had defined my childhood would end with me. Whatever family Ryan and I might create together would be built on different values, on genuine support, on love that doesn't keep score, on the radical notion that all members deserve respect and recognition. As I locked the front door one final time, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The house was just a house now, an investment property, no longer a battleground, and I was no longer defined by my role as the family, scapegoat, or perpetual provider. I was simply Olivia, moving forward into a future of my own design, carrying the lessons of the past without being imprisoned by them. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to break free from toxic family patterns? How did you balance self-protection with the complicated love we often feel for family members who hurt us? Remember that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for your well-being. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment sharing your experience or thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in navigating your own complex relationships.